Thank you so much for your testimony and all of the panelists for your testimony. I recognize myself for questions. Title IX of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 protects students at publicly funded schools from discrimination based on sex. The scope of Title IX's protections has been a primary target of the Trump administration as it has rolled back protections for the LGBTQ community. In 2019, nearly 1 in 3 LGBTQ students were physically harassed. They were physically harassed based on their sexual orientation, while 1 in 4 were physically harassed based on their gender identity. Reverend Sloan, you have extensive experience working with LGBTQ youth. In your opinion, what message does the rollback of Title IX protection send to transgender students and other LGBTQ students who face discrimination based on their gender identities or sexual orientation?
So when our kids, when LGBTQ people are faced with this discrimination, it does emotional and lasting harm to them. Even if they are able to, as Mr. Minton did, find another place to receive the services or the benefits that they need. The mere rejection is a microaggression that scars us and that is very hard to heal from.
Thank you. Ms. Warbelow, President Trump's own Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, initially resisted rolling back these Title IX protections, stating that she was uncomfortable because of the potential harm that rescinding them could cause to transgender students. Was Secretary DeVos right in her initial assessment regarding the impact of rescinding these protections, Ms. Warbelow?
Rescinding the guidelines to schools about their obligations to transgender students created a vacuum which encouraged schools to either engage in discrimination or, for most well-meaning administrators, created a lack of understanding of how they should move forward. They were frightened to protect transgender students despite the fact that they have an obligation not only under Title IX, but under the Equal Protection Clause as well. It's dangerous for students not to have the full protection of the government. Terrifyingly, the Department of Education is also failing to investigate claims of discrimination against LGBTQ students, particularly transgender students.
Well, can you give us some examples of some of the harms we've actually seen from the repeal of these protections?
Transgender students are expected to use restrooms that are not consistent with their gender identity. Students have been forced to use restrooms that are all the way across the campus from where their peers are using restrooms, singling them out for discriminatory behavior. Teachers refuse to intervene when trans students are being harassed by their peers and their classmates. And there are teachers who are disrespectful enough to refuse to call trans students by their names and appropriate pronouns.
In 2018, the Department of Education issued a troubling proposed rule that would undermine equal access to education for LGBTQ sexual assault survivors under Title IX. The rule would make it harder for survivors of sexual assault and harassment who disproportionately identify as LGBTQ to address their claims. How would rolling back these protections harm LGBTQ youth, Ms. Warbelow?
Nearly half of bisexual women have experienced sexual assault, as have nearly half of transgender people in their lifetime. The Title IX rule on sexual assault makes schools more dangerous for all, especially LGBTQ students. There's many provisions of the rule that would harm students, but there are some that are particularly dangerous for LGBTQ students. First, allowing religious institutions to discriminate against LGBT students without warning places them in a situation where they are unaware of whether or not their school will support them if they experience sexual assault or violence. The narrow definition of harassment, from unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature to only incidents that are so severe and pervasive to be objectively effective, denies all students equal access to education.
Well, earlier this month, I led every committee Democrat in sending a letter to Secretary DeVos asking for documents related to this proposal and who is behind it. So far, we have not gotten the documents we asked for, but we will continue our oversight of Title IX, this rule, and Secretary DeVos's troubling record at the Department of Education. Every young person deserves the right to an educational environment in which they are respected and protected. Instead, the actions of this administration have created an environment where LGBTQ youth are made to feel unprotected, unsupported, and unseen.